On the morning my husband handed me a small envelope tied with a silver ribbon, I thought my heart might burst with joy. Inside was a set of tickets, the kind that sparkle with promise. He smiled at me in that practiced way, his voice soft as he said, "You deserve this. A trip to clear your mind, to rest, to enjoy yourself for once." For a woman who had spent decades pouring her energy into our home, supporting him, standing by him through years of his work commitments, it felt like the sweetest gesture. On my 72nd birthday, to be told I should take a vacation for myself felt like proof that he saw me, that I mattered, that I was still loved. At least, that's what I wanted to believe. I held those tickets in trembling hands, imagining the adventure ahead. Maybe it was the beach, the mountains, or even the city lights I had only ever dreamed about. For a fleeting moment, I felt like life had surprised me in the most beautiful way. But as he spoke, something about the way his eyes darted away, the quick glance at his phone, the sigh that slipped from his chest, gnawed at me. A wife knows when her husband's heart is elsewhere. Still, I brushed it aside. After all, what kind of woman doubts her husband on the very day he gifts her something so extraordinary? The rest of the evening felt strangely hollow. He insisted I didn't need to pack much, that everything would be arranged. He told me to focus on enjoying myself, repeating it like a line he'd practiced. I smiled, nodded, and tucked the envelope into my purse. But that night, as I lay in bed, I could feel the silence stretching between us like a wall. I listened to the rhythm of his breathing, steady and calm, while my own chest rose and fell in unease. I tried to remind myself of the man he once was, the husband who held my hand during storms, the father who rocked our children to sleep. But memory can be cruel when it collides with the present, because as much as I wanted to believe the gift was an act of love, something inside whispered that it was a curtain hiding another truth. I had spent years ignoring small cracks in the walls of our marriage, late nights at the office, vague explanations, sudden bursts of generosity followed by cold distance. This trip was meant to silence my suspicions. Instead, it fed them. I woke up the next morning with a decision I never thought I would make. I would not be the woman who turned a blind eye anymore. If there was a truth behind his gift, I would find it. And so, with my heart pounding and my mind sharper than ever, I prepared to follow him. Not as a wife waiting for scraps of attention, but as a woman finally ready to claim her dignity back. At that age, people often say you should accept things as they are. That love, once broken, cannot be questioned anymore. But I refuse to believe that. Silence is not loyalty, and trust without truth is nothing but self-betrayal. If stories like this matter to you, if you believe no woman should have to shrink herself to be loved, tap like and subscribe, because every story I tell is meant to reach someone who needs the courage to stand tall again. And now I leave you with a question. If the person you trusted most offered you a gift that hid a secret, would you accept it blindly or dare to look deeper? The morning light poured into the kitchen like liquid gold, warm and deceptive, casting long shadows across the table where he sat, his posture unusually stiff, his smile uncomfortably polished. Between his hands rested a small envelope, the kind you'd expect to hold a love letter or an invitation to something unforgettable. He slid it across the table with a deliberate motion, his eyes fixed on me with an intensity that felt scripted. "You deserve this," he said, his voice carrying a blend of affection and command, as if he were rehearsing a line in a play and couldn't risk forgetting a single word. For a heartbeat, my world tilted. My chest tightened with anticipation, with the giddy possibility that after decades of routine, after years of sacrifices swallowed quietly in the dark, he was finally recognizing me. My hands trembled as I reached for the envelope, fingers brushing the textured paper. And for a moment, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. The thrill of being chosen, noticed, valued. I peeled open the envelope, slowly, savoring the tension, and inside were airline tickets. A trip. A journey I hadn't asked for, hadn't planned, hadn't even imagined. "You need this," he said again, leaning closer, his voice threaded with insistence. "You've worked so hard for all of us. You've carried everything for so long. It's time for you to rest. Think of it as my gift to you. A way of showing how much I appreciate everything." The words should have wrapped around me like a blanket, soothing and tender, but instead they prickled. They scratched at something hidden beneath the surface of his carefully constructed smile. I wanted to fall into the illusion, to let myself believe I was loved so deeply that he had thought of me, planned for me, prioritized me. But his eyes betrayed him. They shifted too quickly, flicking to the side, unable to anchor themselves in mine for more than a breath. His fingers tapped the table nervously, a rhythm out of sync with the sweetness of his words. And that was when the seed of suspicion was planted. I played my part, though. I let my lips part in surprise, let my voice tremble with gratitude. "This is beautiful," I whispered, clutching the tickets to my chest like they were treasures instead of questions wrapped in paper. He smiled wider, almost relieved, as if my acceptance of the gift lifted a burden from his shoulders. He leaned back, satisfied, as though the scene had gone exactly as he had rehearsed it in his mind. But inside me, the script was breaking. The more I held those tickets, the heavier they became. They weren't symbols of love. They were weights dragging me into uncertainty. I excused myself soon after, carrying the envelope into our bedroom. There, I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I tried to imagine myself strolling along sandy beaches, sipping coffee in a bustling cafe, or gazing out of an airplane window at endless skies. But every image felt hollow, every fantasy cut short by the gnawing voice inside me that whispered, "This isn't what it seems." I thought back to all the times he had been generous before, moments that sparkled on the surface but dulled when examined closely. The necklace years ago, given right after a fight about his late nights at work. The flowers delivered to my office after whispers of rumors reached me. The sudden weekend getaway that happened right after he spent weeks glued to his phone, smiling at messages I wasn't meant to see. This gift, this trip, felt the same. A cover, a distraction, a sleight of hand meant to make me look away from the truth, hiding in plain sight. Yet I couldn't let myself spiral into suspicion entirely. I wanted to believe. I needed to believe. After all, hadn't I given him my youth, my strength, my unwavering loyalty? Hadn't I stood beside him when the world doubted him, when money was scarce, when ambition consumed him? If this was his way of finally saying thank you, who was I to question it? But love is not blind. It only pretends to be. My heart, though aching to accept, saw too clearly the cracks in his performance. That night, as he slept beside me, his breathing slow and steady, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. The envelope sat on the nightstand, mocking me. I replayed his words in my head, analyzing each syllable, dissecting every inflection. Why had he said I needed to rest, instead of, "I want us to rest together"? Why had he been so quick to insist it was for me alone, pushing me away under the guise of generosity? The more I thought about it, the less it resembled love, and the more it resembled strategy. In the days that followed, I prepared for the trip outwardly, but inwardly I prepared for something else entirely. I laid clothes across the bed, folded them neatly into the suitcase, and even researched the destination, pretending to be thrilled. But behind every act, my eyes were watching him. I noticed the way his phone never left his side. I noticed how he seemed lighter, freer, as though sending me away had already unshackled him. And every time he told me again that it would be good for me, his voice carried a tremor. Not the tremor of excitement, but the tremor of a man hiding a secret too heavy for him to carry alone. There was a moment, 3 nights before the supposed departure, when I caught him staring at me while I packed. His gaze was not one of love or admiration, it was calculation. It was as if he were studying me, ensuring that I was convinced, that I had no doubts, that his plan was working. I turned, met his eyes, and smiled. He smiled back, but it didn't reach his soul. And that was when I made my silent vow I would not be fooled. I would take this gift, yes, but not in the way he expected. I would accept the envelope, the tickets, the show of generosity. I would let him believe I was the grateful wife basking in the glow of her husband's love. But in truth, I was sharpening my instincts, preparing to uncover what lay behind his mask, because gifts can be blessings, but they can also be traps. And a woman who has spent her life giving, enduring, and surviving learns to recognize the difference. So I held the tickets close, not as proof of his love, but as evidence of a mystery I was determined to solve. And as I smiled at him, thanking him once again, I thought to myself, the greatest gift he has just given me isn't this trip. It's the opportunity to finally see him clearly. If you were handed a gift that seemed too perfect, too rehearsed, would you let yourself be blinded by its shine? Or would you dare to question what was hiding beneath the wrapping? Tell me in the comments, your choice reveals more about you than you might imagine. The first seeds of suspicion rarely shout, they whisper. They creep in quietly, disguised as fleeting doubts, almost imperceptible to anyone who isn't paying close attention. But when you have lived a lifetime with someone, when you've memorized their rhythms, their tones, the curve of their expressions, you don't need them to shout. The whisper is enough. And for me, those whispers began the very moment after the perfect gift was offered. At first, it was the casual way he brushed aside the possibility of coming along. Most husbands, when planning a trip for their wives, add themselves into the picture. They say things like, "We'll relax together," or "I can't wait to see it with you." But when I gently asked, "Will you be coming with me?" he chuckled awkwardly, shaking his head. No, this is for you. You need time alone. I'll stay behind and take care of things here." His voice was smooth, but the dismissal was too quick, too definitive, as if the idea of accompanying me had never even crossed his mind. The more I asked small questions about the trip, the more evasive he became. I wondered about dates, about how long I'd be away, about what arrangements had been made. Each time, he would respond with vague reassurances. "Don't worry, it's all taken care of." Or worse, he would change the subject entirely, leaning in to kiss my cheek, telling me to focus on how wonderful it will be to finally relax. That word again, relax. He repeated it so often, it began to sound like a command rather than a gift. I kept my face calm, my tone steady, but inside, unease gnawed at me. It wasn't what he said that troubled me, it was what he didn't say. Silence is often louder than words, and in his silences, I heard things he didn't want me to know. And then, the flashbacks began to surface, uninvited but relentless, like ghosts I had tried too long to bury. I remembered the Christmas 3 years ago when he had slipped out of the house on the pretense of picking up dessert. Hours passed, and when he finally returned, he carried a store-bought pie and an explanation about long lines. But I knew then what I know now. The pie was only a cover. His hair was slightly disheveled, his eyes averted, his voice thinner than usual. I told myself to ignore it, to accept the pie and the excuse because the alternative, the truth, was too painful to bear. I remembered the summer when our children were still young, when he claimed to be staying late at work. I had packed the kids into the car to bring him dinner, only to arrive at his office and find it dark, deserted. He explained later that he had been called away to a last-minute meeting at another location. His tone was confident, his gaze steady, and I convinced myself I must have misunderstood. That memory, too, clawed its way back as I watched him avoid my questions about the trip. And I remembered, perhaps most painfully, the weekend years ago when he insisted I take the children to visit my sister out of town, assuring me he would join us later. He never did. The phone calls that weekend were sparse, his excuses flimsy, and when I returned home, I found the faintest trace of a perfume I did not own lingering in the sheets. I convinced myself it was my imagination, but was it? Now, with this sudden gift, every buried suspicion rose to the surface, demanding attention. Wanted desperately to dismiss them again, to fold them into the quiet corners of my mind where uncomfortable truths go to sleep. But this time, I couldn't. Something about the way he delivered that gift, the way he washed his hands of my presence so quickly, refusing to anchor himself in the joy of the gesture, it made denial impossible. I began to notice every small detail. The way his eyes flickered to his phone when he thought I wasn't watching. The way he deflected every question with a laugh, too light, too airy, the kind of laugh people use when they're hiding something. The way he would avoid looking at me directly, as if my gaze might peel back the mask he had so carefully placed. I started writing the questions in my head like a list. Why didn't he want to join me? Why was he avoiding specifics? Why did he seem almost relieved when I played along with my forced excitement? Why did his smile falter for just a split second when I said, "I'll miss you while I'm gone"? And once you start asking questions, you cannot stop. Questions are like cracks in glass, tiny at first, but under the pressure of time and memory, they splinter until the whole surface shatters. I lay awake at night, staring into the darkness, hearing his breathing beside me. My mind would travel back and forth between the present and the past, weaving together a pattern I had refused to acknowledge for decades. Was this trip meant to remove me from the picture? To give him space to live another life without my watchful eyes? Or was it meant to distract me from something he was already planning? He underestimated me. He thought that after years of silence, years of pushing aside my own instincts for the sake of peace, I would continue to play the fool. But he forgot that silence breeds clarity, that patience sharpens perception, that a woman who has endured neglect and doubt for too long learns to hear the whispers between the words. And so, though I never voiced my suspicions aloud, though I smiled and pretended to be touched by his gift, I was already building my resolve. I was already planning, already preparing to dig deeper. He believed he had written the script for me, that I would obediently play my role as the grateful wife. What he didn't know was that I had stopped playing long ago. I knew something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones, in the pit of my stomach, in the pounding of my heart each time he avoided my gaze. I had ignored those feelings before, buried them. Under duty, under hope, under the desperate belief that love was worth blind trust. But not this time. If you were in my place, sensing that something was off, would you confront the truth immediately, or would you stay silent and watch the story unfold? Tell me in the comments. Your choice reveals whether you value peace or truth more. Decisions are rarely born in grand moments. They come quietly, forming in the back of the mind like a storm brewing on the horizon, gathering weight and force, until the clouds are too heavy to ignore. My decision began that night, as I lay beside him in bed, pretending to sleep. My body still as stone, while my thoughts churned like a restless tide. The tickets were tucked neatly into the drawer of my nightstand, but I felt their presence like a pulse in the darkness, a reminder of everything that didn't add up. I stared into the dark, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, steady, untroubled, the breathing of a man at peace. How could he be so calm when my heart thundered in my chest? I turned slightly, watching the silhouette of his face in the faint glow of the streetlight filtering through the blinds. His lips were parted, his brow smooth, his hands folded loosely on his chest. He looked almost innocent in sleep, almost like the man I had married decades ago, before the weight of secrets had etched themselves into his every gesture. But innocence is not what I saw. What I saw was detachment. What I saw was a man who could lie. Beside me, knowing he was leading me into a story where I was not the protagonist, but the distraction. The next morning, I went through the motions of routine, pouring coffee, buttering toast, asking casual questions about his schedule. He answered each one easily, even lightly, as though nothing lay beneath the surface. But the ease was what unsettled me most. People who have nothing to hide don't speak with that kind of rehearsed smoothness. Truth doesn't require rehearsal. His words slid too neatly into place, each one carefully positioned to avoid inviting another question. By then, the decision had crystallized. I wouldn't go on the trip as he planned. I wouldn't play the role of the obedient wife accepting her gift with gratitude. I would follow him, quietly, relentlessly. I would watch where he went, what he did, who he was when he thought I was far away. I would peel back the curtain he had so carefully drawn across my eyes. The thought filled me with both dread and exhilaration. It wasn't easy to imagine. The logistics alone made my head spin. How would I leave without him noticing? How would I track him without being seen? How would I keep my composure if I stumbled upon something I could never unsee? These questions circled me like vultures, but beneath them all was one undeniable truth. I had to know. I could no longer live in the limbo of suspicion, no longer lull myself into submission with half-believed lies. If my marriage was built on a foundation of deceit, I needed to face it head-on, no matter how much it shattered me. That week, I began to act in secret. I told him I was packing, that I was excited, that I was planning excursions and thinking about what books I would bring for long afternoons of rest. I let my voice drip with gratitude, my eyes shine with rehearsed admiration. He believed me. I could see it in the way his shoulders eased when I spoke, in the way he allowed himself a satisfied smile whenever I mentioned how much I was looking forward to being away. He thought his plan was working perfectly. And perhaps, in a way, it was, but not in the way he imagined. Meanwhile, I was making my own preparations. I checked the drawer where he kept his old briefcases and travel bags, noticing the absence of one I hadn't seen in months. I memorized the rhythm of his text messages, how often his phone buzzed, and how quickly he silenced it. I paid attention to the way he lingered near the front window, looking out as though expecting someone. I noted the times he left the house under small pretexts. I'll just grab some groceries, or I need to check on something at the office. The absences were short, but suspicious in their regularity. Each one was another thread in the tapestry I was weaving in my mind, a tapestry of deceit. There was one evening, in particular, that sealed my resolve. He came home later than usual, the faint smell of cologne clinging to him, one I didn't recognize. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't his usual scent. When I asked where he had been, he replied too quickly. Traffic was terrible. He didn't even invent a place, just traffic. A vague, empty answer, designed to close the door on any further inquiry. I smiled, nodded, and let it pass. But inside, I was burning. That night, I made the final arrangements. I wouldn't confront him directly, not yet. I would follow quietly, like a shadow. I would let him walk into his secret, believing I was far away, when, in truth, I would be closer than he ever imagined. The thought filled me with a kind of grim power. For once, I wasn't reacting to his moves. I was creating my own. The following days blurred together as I rehearsed my plan in my mind. I pictured myself leaving the house after him, keeping my distance, watching as he stepped into a world he thought was hidden from me. I pictured the confrontation I might eventually face, the moment when the curtain would be pulled back and his double life revealed. But more than that, I pictured myself no longer being the passive recipient of his lies, but the author of my own truth. The more I thought about it, the more certain I became. This wasn't just about him. It was about me. About reclaiming the dignity I had allowed to be eroded by years of excuses and half-truths. About proving to myself that my instincts were not the ramblings of paranoia, but the sharp edge of intuition honed by decades of silence. When he kissed me goodbye the next morning, murmuring about how much I would enjoy my trip, I kissed him back with a calm he couldn't detect. Inside, my heart thundered, but my face betrayed nothing. He thought I was fooled. He thought he was free. But I had already chosen. The secret decision was mine, and it would change everything. If you suspected someone close to you was hiding a double life, would you confront them head-on or follow quietly to uncover the truth? Share your thoughts. Your answer says more about your strength than you may realize. The day the truth began to unfold was nothing extraordinary on the surface. The sky was overcast, the air heavy with the promise of rain, and everything about the morning routine seemed painfully ordinary. He kissed my cheek as he left, his lips brushing against my skin with a mechanical precision that no longer fooled me. "Don't forget to check your suitcase again," he said, with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. I nodded, thanked him, and waved as he disappeared through the front door. But as soon as the sound of his car faded down the street, my pulse quickened. This was the moment I had been preparing for, the moment my secret decision came to life. I dressed quickly, choosing clothes that would allow me to blend into the background. Neutral colors, nothing flashy, shoes comfortable enough to follow quietly if I needed to. My hands shook as I grabbed my purse, slipping the small notebook inside where I had written every detail I had observed in the days before, the times he left. The patterns of his movements, the vague excuses that no longer made sense. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. I followed at a distance, my heart hammering against my ribs as I steered my car carefully behind his. At first, it felt almost absurd, a wife trailing her own husband like some amateur detective. But with every mile, the absurdity faded, replaced by something sharper: resolve. This wasn't a game, this was survival, this was truth. He drove with a calm familiarity, turning onto roads that should have led him to his office downtown. But halfway there, he veered off, taking an exit I had never seen him use before. My grip tightened on the steering wheel, my breath catching as the scenery shifted from the bustle of the city to quieter streets lined with small cafes, modest shops, and neighborhoods where no one would think to look for him. I kept my distance, slowing when he slowed, speeding up when he did, my body a bundle of nerves and adrenaline. Finally, he pulled into the parking lot of a modest office building. It wasn't flashy, nothing about it screamed importance. But the way he parked, quickly, deliberately, like someone who knew exactly where they were going, made my stomach twist. I parked further down the street, my hands trembling as I cut the engine. Through the windshield, I watched as he stepped out, adjusted his tie, and glanced around before entering the building. The glance wasn't casual. It was sharp, calculated, as if he were checking to see if anyone was watching. I sat frozen for a moment, my mind spinning. Why here? Why not his regular office? Who was inside that building that required secrecy? I waited 10 long minutes, my nerves fraying with each second. Then, unable to resist, I stepped out of my car, straightened my coat, and walked slowly toward the entrance. My palms were slick with sweat, but my resolve carried me forward. Inside, the building was quiet, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing faintly above me. A receptionist sat behind a desk, her head bent over some paperwork. She glanced up briefly, her smile polite but distracted. "Can I help you?" she asked. I shook my head, mumbling something about waiting for someone, and moved to sit in the small lobby. My heart pounded as I tried to look casual, my eyes fixed on the hallway where my husband had disappeared. Minutes passed. The receptionist busied herself, phone calls came and went, and I sat there, every nerve on edge. And then, from down the hallway, I heard it, his laugh. That laugh I knew so well, deep and warm, the laugh that had once made me fall in love with him. But it wasn't meant for me. I stood up, following the sound, my footsteps light, my breath shallow. I stopped just short of a half-open door, the sound of his voice drifting into the hallway. "You look incredible today," he said, his tone low and smooth, a tone he hadn't used with me in years. My chest tightened as I edged closer, peeking inside through the narrow opening. There. He was my husband, sitting comfortably in a chair, his tie loosened, his hand resting on the arm of another woman. She was younger, her smile bright and adoring, her body leaning into his as if the space between them had never existed. She wasn't just a colleague, she wasn't just a friend. She was something more. Something that had been hidden from me behind late nights and vague excuses. I stood frozen, my body numb, my mind reeling. There it was, the double life I had feared, laid bare in front of me. He spoke to her with a tenderness I hadn't heard in years, his words spilling out effortlessly. Unburdened by the weight of deception because he believed I was miles away, preparing for my trip. I wanted to storm in, to scream, to demand answers, but something stronger held me back. I needed to see. I needed to hear. I needed the truth in its entirety, unbroken by lies or justifications. So I stood silently, hidden in the shadows, watching the man I had built a life with transform before my eyes into someone I no longer recognized. The woman laughed, her voice high and musical, as she leaned closer, brushing her hand against his. "You're sure she suspects nothing?" she asked softly. He shook his head, smiling with a confidence that made my stomach churn. "Not a thing. She thinks I'm sending her away to rest. By the time she's gone, we'll have all the time in the world." Those words shattered something inside me. The gift had never been for me. It was for them. My trip was his freedom. My absence was their opportunity. Every smile, every kiss, every word of reassurance had been nothing but a mask to cover the life he lived behind my back. I stumbled away from the door, my heart pounding so loudly I feared they would hear it. My legs felt weak, my breath shallow, but I forced myself to walk calmly, past the receptionist, out the door, and back to my car. Once inside, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. Not yet, not here. The truth was no longer hidden. I had seen it, heard it, felt it, cut through me like a blade. And yet, beneath the pain, beneath the fury, a strange clarity began to rise. He thought he had fooled me, thought he had orchestrated the perfect plan. But now, I had something he didn't. Knowledge. And knowledge, I realized, was power. If you were standing at that door, hearing the person you trusted most admit they had built a life behind your back, would you walk in and confront them immediately, or would you stay silent and use the truth to your advantage? Share your thoughts because your answer might reveal how you would handle betrayal in your own life. Pain is not always loud. Sometimes it's a silence so deep it drowns you. Sometimes it's the quiet ache in your chest when you realize the person you trusted most has not only deceived you, but carefully constructed an entire world where you were nothing more than an obstacle. That day, after walking out of that building, after watching the man I had shared decades of my life with hold another woman as though she were his true companion, I felt the kind of pain that splits a soul into pieces. I drove aimlessly for hours, my hands gripping the wheel, my eyes fixed on the road, but not really seeing. The city blurred around me, cars honked, people rushed by, but all I could hear was his voice echoing in my head. She thinks I'm sending her away to rest. By the time she's gone, we'll have all the time in the world. Those words wrapped around me like chains, heavy and suffocating, branding themselves into my memory. Every syllable was another dagger, another reminder that while I had been loyal, faithful, and blind with love, he had been building a second life where I had no place. I pulled over at a quiet park, shutting off the engine, and sat there in the stillness. The world continued around me. Children laughing, dogs barking, the rustle of leaves in the wind, but inside me, everything was broken. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel, letting out a sound I didn't recognize, half sob, half gasp. The sound of a woman whose world had just collapsed. Memories began to flood in like waves, each one now tinged with bitterness. The anniversary dinners where he seemed distracted, checking his phone under the table. The birthdays where his gifts were too extravagant, too sudden, as if purchased to cover a guilt he dared not name. The late nights at the office, the weekends he claimed to need rest, the unexplained absences. I had ignored them all, clinging to the belief that love required trust, that marriage demanded forgiveness of small imperfections. But now I saw them for what they were. Not imperfections, but patterns. Not small mistakes, but choices. Choices to betray, choices to deceive, choices to make me a stranger in my own life. The pain wasn't just in knowing he had betrayed me with another woman. It was in the realization that I had betrayed myself, too. I had silenced my own instincts, brushed aside my own doubts, convinced myself over and over again that love meant loyalty even when the evidence screamed otherwise. I had given him my loyalty at the expense of my dignity. And now, sitting alone in that car, I felt the weight of that truth crush me. But pain has a way of stripping away illusions. It forces you to look at yourself in the rawest form, to confront the question that burns at the core of betrayal. Who am I? Now, was I the discarded wife, the fool who never saw the signs? Or was I the woman strong enough to see the truth, to face it, to let it forge her into something stronger? The answer hovered in the silence, waiting for me to claim it. I thought of the years I had spent standing beside him, the sacrifices, the late nights waiting by the window for him to come home, the dinners that went cold, the conversations that never happened. I thought of the children we had raised, the home we had built, the promises whispered in the dark when we were young and foolish enough to believe love could conquer anything. And I realized that every memory was now stained by the shadow of his betrayal. But at the same time, those memories belonged to me. They were my sacrifices, my love, my life. He could stain them, but he could never erase them. The pain was unbearable, yes, but it was also awakening. It made me see how much of myself I had given away, how much of my worth I had tied to his recognition, his approval, his presence. And as much as it burned, I knew that pain was the proof that I was still alive, still capable of feeling, still capable of reclaiming what was mine. I wiped the tears from my face, forcing myself to breathe deeply. I looked at my reflection in the rearview mirror, my eyes swollen, my cheeks streaked with tears. But in that reflection, I also saw resilience. I saw a woman who had endured storms before and survived. I saw someone who had carried a family, sacrificed dreams, and borne silence for years. And if I could survive all that, then I could survive this. When I finally drove home that evening, the house felt different. The walls, once filled with laughter and routine, now felt hollow, echoing with unspoken truths. I walked through each room slowly, touching the furniture, the photographs, the pieces of a life I had built. The pain sharpened with every step, but so did my clarity. He thought he had broken me, but what he had really done was wake me up. I sat in our bedroom, the envelope with the tickets still lying in the drawer, and stared at it for a long time. That envelope was no longer a gift. It was evidence. Proof of his betrayal, proof of his lies, proof that I had been underestimated. He wanted me gone so he could live freely, but he had forgotten one simple truth. I wasn't the same woman he thought I was. The pain of betrayal cuts deeper than any wound, but it also carves out space for strength to grow. And as I sat there, clutching that envelope, I realized I was at a crossroads. I could collapse under the weight of this betrayal, or I could rise from it, sharper, wiser, stronger. And for the first time in years, I felt the faintest flicker of power inside me. If you had discovered such a betrayal, would you let the pain consume you, or would you use it to rise stronger than before? Tell me in the comments, because your choice reveals whether betrayal defines you or transforms you. Turning points never arrive with fanfare. They don't announce themselves with trumpets or dramatic music the way stories in movies would have you believe. Instead, they creep in quietly, disguised as moments that could almost be overlooked, until you realize they've shifted everything. For me, the turning point came after nights of restless silence. After hours spent staring at the ceiling while his steady breathing filled the room. After days of feeling the crushing weight of betrayal pressing into my bones. I had seen the truth, I had felt the searing pain of it. But pain alone wasn't enough. Pain was passive. Pain consumed, but it did not create. And I knew, deep inside, that if I let the pain linger without transforming it, I would become a ghost of myself, living in the shadows of his deceit. That night, as I sat in our living room with only the dim lamp casting its glow across the walls, I realized something vital. I could not change what he had done, but I could choose how I responded. That choice, the first real choice I had given myself in years, was the turning point. I took out the envelope with the tickets and held it in my hands. The paper felt heavier than it should have, weighted with meaning, poisoned by his lies. He had meant it as a chain, a way to remove me, to exile me so he could live freely. But in my hands, it became something else entirely, a symbol. A reminder that I could no longer allow him to dictate the script of my life. For decades, I had played the role he wrote for me, the loyal wife, the patient partner, the woman who smiled through neglect and looked away from suspicious absences. That role was dead now. The turning point was not about revenge, though revenge whispered temptingly in the back of my mind. It was about reclaiming power. For so long, I had surrendered my instincts, silenced my voice, allowed his comfort to matter more than my truth. But when I thought about everything I had endured, everything I had sacrificed, I realized I had already proven my strength. The betrayal wasn't proof of my weakness, it was proof of his cowardice. And that knowledge, bitter as it was, began to fuel me. The next morning, I woke before him. I stood at the mirror, looking at my reflection in the soft light of dawn. My face was marked by time, by years of sacrifice, by tears shed in silence. But I also saw resilience staring back at me. I saw the woman who had raised children, kept a home together, carried burdens no one else even noticed. I saw someone who had given everything and yet still had more inside her. And in that moment, I understood. He had mistaken my patience for weakness, my silence for ignorance, my loyalty for blindness. But he was wrong. I began to make plans in secret. I opened old files, looked through accounts, reconnected with contacts I had long neglected. Every phone call, every email, every quiet inquiry reminded me of something I had almost forgotten. I wasn't powerless. I had resources. I had knowledge. I had the ability to shape the outcome of this story, not just be swept along by his lies. Each time he left the house, I used those hours not to weep, but to prepare. My pain turned into fuel, sharpening my focus, giving me a clarity I hadn't felt in years. I started documenting everything: his absences, his excuses, the words he spoke, the places he went. I was building a foundation, not for confrontation, but for transformation. I wanted to ensure that when the moment came, I would not stumble. In blind fury, I would stand in calm power, holding the weight of truth in my hands. The turning point wasn't loud, but it was undeniable. It was the moment I shifted from victim to strategist, from someone deceived to someone prepared. And once that shift took root, I could feel it in every breath, in every step I took. My shoulders squared differently, my voice carried differently, my eyes no longer avoided his. I wasn't hiding from the truth anymore, I was harnessing it. He didn't notice, he was too wrapped up in his double life, too confident in his illusion of control. He thought I was still the same woman, grateful for his crumbs of affection, obediently preparing for a trip I would never take. But I wasn't her anymore. I had crossed the invisible line that separates despair from resolve, and once you cross it, you can never go back. That night, lying beside him in the dark, I realized I no longer feared the truth. What I feared was wasting the truth. I feared becoming the kind of woman who learns the depths of betrayal and then does nothing, who allows herself to remain in the prison built by someone else's lies. I promised myself I would not be that woman. And so, the turning point was not just a moment, it was a vow. A vow to myself that I would never again ignore the whispers of my instincts. A vow that I would never again sacrifice my dignity at the altar of someone else's comfort. A vow that this betrayal, as painful as it was, would not destroy me. It would redefine me. I closed my eyes that night with a strange calm settling over me. The pain was still there, raw and sharp, but beneath it was something steadier, strength, and that strength whispered a promise of its own. The story was far from over. If you reached your own turning point, would you use it to rise and reshape your life, or would you let the weight of betrayal hold you down? Share your thoughts, because your answer may reveal the strength you didn't know you had. The days after the turning point moved differently, almost as if time itself had shifted its weight. Where once I felt crushed beneath the burden of betrayal, I now carried something sharper, something steadier, resolve. I could no longer unsee the truth of his double life. The woman who had peeked through that door and witnessed his lies wrapped around another body was not the same woman who now walked through our home, silent yet empowered. Each step I took, each look in the mirror, was a reminder that I had crossed into a new chapter. But the story had not yet reached its end, and that is what gave each moment its raw, electric charge. When the phone finally rang, days after the discovery, I knew it would. Deep down, I had been waiting for it. His voice carried its usual warmth, rehearsed and smooth, dripping with the performance of a man who believed he was still in control. He asked me if I was preparing for the trip, if I had packed everything I wanted, if I felt ready to finally enjoy some peace. I played along, my answers sweet and careful, each word hiding the storm beneath. He thought he was guiding me gently into exile, when in truth, I was already steps ahead of him. The silence between his questions told me more than the words themselves. I could hear it in the way he hesitated just slightly before speaking, in the way his laughter sounded strained, in the way he rushed to end the call. He was managing two lives at once, balancing the lies like a juggler on a tightrope. Unaware that I was watching from below, waiting for him to drop everything. When he returned home one evening, I studied him quietly. His face looked tired, his tie slightly loosened, his steps just a bit too quick. But what struck me most was not the man himself, but my reaction to him. I no longer saw my husband, the man I once trusted more than anyone else. I saw an actor rehearsing lines, a man trapped in a role he had written for himself, unaware that his stage was collapsing. I could have confronted him then, demanded answers, unleashed my fury. But confrontation would have given him control, allowed him to spin his narrative, twist the truth, bury me once again under a mountain of lies. I didn't want confrontation. I wanted clarity, and clarity meant patience. The following nights, I continued my quiet planning. Each moment of solitude became a rehearsal, each memory of betrayal another stone in the foundation of my strength. I thought about the years of sacrifice, the nights of loneliness, the trust I had poured into a man who had treated it like disposable currency. And I realized something that startled me. The betrayal was no longer just his story. It was mine too. It was the story of how I had been silenced, how I had allowed myself to live in the shadows, and how I was now clawing my way back into the light. Days later, when his phone rang in the middle of dinner, I watched him. He excused himself casually, stepping into the hallway, his voice low but audible. Enough for me to catch fragments. I caught the tenderness in his words, the promises he made under the guise of work. I stared at the food growing cold on my plate, and I smiled, not out of happiness, but out of certainty. Certainty that his house of cards was trembling, that every word he spoke brought him closer to exposure. It was in that moment that I understood the open ending of my story was not about him, it was about me, about who I would choose to become now that the veil had been lifted. Would I be the woman who forgave for the sake of comfort, who allowed betrayal to be swept under the rug, in exchange for the illusion of peace? Or would I be the woman who stepped into her power, who allowed the truth to break her chains instead of her spirit? I didn't have to decide that night. In fact, I didn't want to. Some decisions are stronger when they linger, when they grow roots in silence. I let the choice hang in the air, heavy and potent, knowing that in my hesitation, there was power. He believed he still held the pen that wrote our story. He didn't realize I had already taken it from him. And so, the open ending remained. I went about my days with quiet dignity, no longer hiding from the truth, no longer burdened by denial. I wasn't ready to reveal my hand, not yet. But the moment would come. The betrayal had forced me into the shadows, but in those shadows I had found something he could never take away, myself. Sometimes being ignored, deceived, or underestimated is the very thing that awakens the fire within you. Sometimes the silence of betrayal is not a punishment, but a blessing, a chance to see your true worth without the noise of lies clouding your vision. And as I lay in bed beside him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing, I realized the greatest shift of all. I was no longer afraid of what would happen next, because whatever came, it would not destroy me. It would define me. If your partner handed you a gift that was secretly meant to remove you from the picture, and you uncovered the double life they had been hiding, would you forgive to keep the life you know? Or would you walk into the unknown and reclaim yourself? Share your truth in the comments because your answer reveals not just what you would do, but who you really are. There are moments in life when everything we thought we knew shatters. When the ground beneath us feels unsteady, and we are forced to confront truths we would rather ignore. Betrayal, disappointment, neglect, they strike at the very core of who we are, making us question our worth, our choices, and even our faith. Yet, it is in those very moments, when the night feels the darkest, that the seed of transformation begins to grow. For it is not in times of ease that our spirit is tested, but in the storms where we are stripped bare and asked to discover what lies within. When trust is broken, when love feels like a lie, it is easy to believe that everything is lost. But what if betrayal is not the end, but the beginning? What if the very pain that was meant to destroy you is the same pain that sharpens you into someone stronger, wiser, and more courageous than you ever imagined? Every tear shed becomes a testimony of resilience. Every silence endured becomes a canvas where strength paints its masterpiece. And every broken promise becomes a reminder that your dignity cannot be defined by the actions of another, but by the way you choose to rise in response. Faith does not promise us a life without trials. Faith promises that through every trial, we are not alone. There is a purpose even in the silence, a meaning even in the betrayal, a light even in the darkest night. Sometimes, what feels like rejection is actually redirection. Sometimes, what feels like abandonment is the very space you need to discover your voice. And sometimes, the cruelty of others becomes the classroom where your own courage is revealed. To walk through betrayal and still hold on to hope is no small thing. It is an act of defiance against despair. It is a declaration that you will not let bitterness take root in your soul, that you will not allow lies to define your story. Because, while others may betray you, dismiss you, or underestimate you, they cannot take from you the strength that comes from within. That strength belongs to you alone, and it grows each time you refuse to surrender. This is the quiet victory of faith, to look at what was meant to break you, and instead see it as the foundation of your rebirth. To take the shattered pieces of your trust and build something unshakable. To learn that dignity is not granted by the recognition of others, but by the unwavering belief that your worth is immeasurable, no matter who fails to see it. In every broken story, there is a hidden blessing. In every betrayal, there is a chance for awakening. And in every ending, there is the seed of a new beginning. What others meant as your downfall can become the very reason you rise higher than ever before. For sometimes being ignored, betrayed, or left behind is not a curse, but a gift. The gift of discovering that you are stronger than you ever knew. And so, as this chapter draws to a pause, the question lingers not about what was done to you, but about who you will become because of it. Will you let betrayal harden your heart, or will you let it open your eyes? Will you let pain silence you, or will you let it give you a voice? Will you be defined by what was lost, or by the strength you found in the aftermath? The answer is yours too, right? And in that choice lies the true power of your story. If this story has spoken to your heart, if it reminded you of your own strength, I invite you to support this journey. Tap like, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me, because the next story will take us even deeper into places where pain and redemption collide in ways you will not expect. The storm we face today is only part of a greater path, and what comes next may just be the reminder you've been waiting for.